Today, our subcommittee is meeting to discuss Transportation Security Administration's international operations and their interactions with adversarial foreign governments, especially the Republic of Cuba, a state sponsor of terrorism. May 20th, 2024 marked the 122nd celebration of Cuban Independence Day, and it's an extremely significant date for Cuban expatriates, such as myself, many of whom fled their home after the communist dictatorship took over. Each year on May 20th, Cuban Americans remember the sacrifices made to escape communism, celebrate the freedoms we enjoy in the United States, and pray for those who are still subjugated to the rule of the brutal communist dictatorship. However, on May 20th, 2024, TSA and the State Department welcomed the Castro regime agents to the home of the largest population of Cuban Americans in the United States by hosting them for a tour of the Miami International Airport. That's pretty much a slap in the face of the Cuban Americans all across the country, but especially those living in Miami. Serious precautions must be taken while dealing with the communist Cuban regime. Cuba is among the chief counterintelligence and national security threats of the United States. Just 90 miles from the Florida Keys, part of the district that I represent, the regime actively works to deepen ties with our adversaries, such as the Chinese and the Russians, to operate spy bases and conducting joint military exercises with them. Furthermore, our diplomats in Havana have been victims of anomalous health incidents that are potentially a result of a foreign intelligence service using microwave technology to target our foreign service officers, causing brain damage and long-term disabilities. Additionally, Cuba's intelligence services actively recruit spies from the U.S. federal agencies, and some of their agents, such as Victor Manuel Rocha, Kendall Myers, and Ala Belén Montes, have spent decades passing classified information to Cuba. Their information shared to Cuba has caused countless deaths of Cuban citizens attempting to work against the Castro regime and American service members operating around the world. I'm deeply concerned about the somewhat careless nature of this visit. It's evident that TSA and the State Department neglected to take the threat of Cuban officials on American soil seriously, which leads me to believe that they don't think Cuba poses really much of a threat to the United States. TSA and the State Department failed to notify or coordinate this visit with airport authorities, state and local officials, and they did not notify Congress of their intention to host a state sponsor of terrorism on American soil. Furthermore, TSA continued the delegation's visit and allowed the agents access to TSA headquarters after some of my House and Senate colleagues and I sent a letter to the TSA administrator and DHS secretary expressing our outrage. To make matters worse, senior leaders within TSA, including Administrator Pekoski, were unaware of this visit, which further demonstrates TSA's negligence and calls into question TSA's ability to appropriate, interact with adversarial foreign governments such as the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation and the Republic of Cuba. Unfortunately, we have been through this fire drill before with another Department of Homeland Security component. In February of 2023, the United States Coast Guard hosted a Cuban delegation that consisted of the Cuban Border Guard and Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Luckily, Congress was notified of this visit ahead of time, and Chairman Green, Chairman McCall, Chairwoman Salazar, and I sent a letter to the Coast Guard leadership and were able to prevent the Castro regime agents from accessing U.S. Coast Guard headquarters and other sensitive U.S. federal government facilities. Immediately following this, Senator Rubio and I wrote common sense legislation that was included in the FY24 NDAA that prevents the United States Coast Guard from working with state sponsors of terrorism on all but the most critical missions such as search and rescue and counter human trafficking. I'm extremely concerned that the Department of Homeland Security lacks the proper policies and procedures across its components to appropriately interact with adversarial nation states, especially state sponsors of terrorism, and learn from past mistakes to take corrective actions in the future. It's obvious that TSA and DHS must improve internal processes, better coordinate international engagements with state and local authorities, and ensure that Congress has the proper visibility into engagements with adversarial nation states. I'm committed to addressing these failures and taking corrective action that DHS has neglected to do on its own. The United States cannot take a back seat and reward the Cuban government with special access in the United States while it carries out major human rights abuses on its own citizens. Thank you to our witnesses, Ms. Harvey and Ms. Fitzmaurice, for appearing before the subcommittee, and I look forward to your testimony.